Yep. IMHO Talk Show, Sir Charles Razor, back like we never left, Razor.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. Tell a friend as well. IMHO Talk Show online, as well as WVAI on the streaming apps. But you can see our beautiful faces right now, too, if you want to tune in our YouTube, our Facebook. You know how to find us. But thank you, family. And as we always do, Razor, we keep celebrating our folks, our community. Mm-hmm. And, we try to do our job, calling things out need to be called out. And we have another new member to our community. Not so new anymore, but pretty relatively new.
Nah, she knew. She ain't been on here.
Yeah, that's right. You right.
I forgot to tell you, I cut up. I wasn't going to tell you that before I got you on air. I got you now.
Like she is here for her christening. You are now christened to Charlottesville, Virginia, because you are here at, in my humble opinion, talk show. None other than Inez Gonzalez. She is the new executive director for the Police Civilian Oversight Board for this city of Charlottesville.
Give the acronym. They don't know all them words you be talking about.
PCOB.
Thank you.
PCOB. Police Civilian Oversight Board. Yes, indeed. So should we call you Inez, Officer Gonzalez?
Inez
is fine. All right, thank you. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. So, for those that don't know, let's first preface this conversation by talking about what exactly the Police Civilian Oversight Board is and does.
Well, apparently the 2017 incident that occurred in Charlottesville brought about the need for a little bit more police accountability. And so it's my understanding that a group of residents from the city of Charlottesville made a proposal to the city council to create an oversight body that would actually oversee investigations of the Charlottesville Police Department.
Right. Gotcha. And now, is that clear for you, Razor?
No, yeah, trust me. I know all about what the police do.
All right, no. So in saying that, give us a little more of your background and sort of, what started you in this work that led up to you choosing to come to Charlottesville.
That's a very, very long story. Y'all got time for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, as far as relatable to, to being, a officer or like related, to the law, because I read your story and I think it's a great story. I think people need to know exactly where you come from, that experience you bring. So,
born and raised in the city of Newark, New Jersey, and ultimately becoming a police officer in 1989. That's how far back I go. And did 26 and a half years with the Newark Police Department. I achieved the rank of captain. I was the first Hispanic female at every rank in the city's history. And ultimately, I was assigned to both the Operations Bureau for half of my career, Detective Bureau, but ultimately towards the latter part of my career after I made captain, I spent close to about 10 years actually from sergeant to captain on and off in internal affairs.
Okay.
And at first I was actually recruited to internal affairs. I was asked, I said no. And ultimately I wound up getting transferred there anyway. But I got to see things from a different perspective and where I thought that, because internal affairs was always viewed as a rat squad, right?
Right.
Cops ratting on other cops.
Yeah.
But then I realized that you can actually do a lot of good where if you do have bad police officers and you conduct a good investigation, you can, have that officer removed and with no chance of coming back, right? Because if you do a bad investigation, through the union process and appeals process and things like that, they can always get their jobs back. So you can do that, but you can also take a police officer who's a good cop that didn't do anything wrong and go as far out of your way to prove, to exonerate that officer rather, as you would to find him guilty. So you can do good either way, because it actually has a tendency to kill a police officer's spirit who's a good cop doing right, to actually be reprimanded for something that he really shouldn't be reprimanded for, just for, let's say, the sake of politics or optics, which is what sometimes happens.
But now Newark to Charlottesville, that had to be a culture shock for you. Why Charlottesville?
Well, because of the 2017 incident, I had been following, I thought that for me, that police oversight was the logical progression in terms of my next career. Because I knew that I loved policing and I wanted to make policing better. And I got to see all of the unfortunate high-profile incidents that you saw on television involving very bad police work. And I thought that it would be a natural progression for me to try to get involved in police oversight and to go to an agency that was actually willing and a community that actually wanted that type of police oversight and wanted to make that kind of change in terms of police reform.
Yeah.
And so I had been following Charlottesville since the 2017 incident, and I thought that's a logical place to go. So when I saw the advertisement for the job, I seized the opportunity.
Yeah, had you heard of Charlottesville before 2017? Because a lot of people had.
I had, yeah.
Okay. You know, because unfortunately, you know, that was definitely, you know, sort of a stain on history. There's been many stains on Charlottesville history, but particularly that, you know, where after 2017, you would Google Charlottesville, Virginia, and
that's all that came
up, right?
Unite
You know?
the Right.
What do you have to be made of to be a woman of color to come to a place that is in pretty much turmoil at a time? Seeing what they did to another female police chief, seeing what they do to city managers of color, and still want to step into that. Like, I mean, as Black people, we got some other Black people, right? You ain't got a lot of Puerto Ricans around here. So,
True. Well, I've always been a pioneer in that regard. So
That's right.
again, the first at every rank, and then
That's right.
there
Set them straight on this.
no, I'm just wondering, like, what, I mean, to take and to be a woman, and to be internal affairs, and to be like, at every time people always giving you a side eye.
Well, and that was the case for me from the very beginning. I mean, I was the only female in a recruit class of 64 of the worst individuals that God ever put on the planet. They gave me a really hard time when I was in the academy, but I wound up with a leadership award by the time that I graduated the academy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, being the first, being a pioneer in terms of, you know, women in policing and that kind of thing, that's always been my thing. And I've never been known to be a slouch. I'm somebody who is known to be quite vocal.
Do you think that helped you, that people being tough on you like that?
I think it made me, I guess, a lot more resilient than maybe I would have been if I had not been challenged as much. But I'm actually grateful that I had a mom, God rest her soul, that was always very supportive of me and never told me what it is I could not do.
That's
you know,
right.
back in high school, I was always being told what it is I couldn't achieve, and even certain members of my family, because I was raised poor, you know, raised in the projects, you know, public assistance, you know, single parent home. Everybody always told me I would never amount to anything.
Because Charles don't like us to be hard on the football player.
but tell the truth though, Charlottesville probably looks like Disneyland to you. Come from Newark, New Jersey.
New Jersey draft, come on now. Come on out there.
No, listen. Well, let's say things that you have in common. Great restaurants, right? You're not lacking in restaurants. So the food is good. A lot of culture here. Is it like less activity than I'm accustomed to? But that's not necessarily a bad thing,
Right?
Because you know where I came from. So I mean, crime is a thing there. I mean, you know, it used to be that we were for example, the stolen car capital of the country.
Absolutely. Made a movie about it.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, our shootings and crime and things like that. So yeah, it was a challenging environment, but I think it made me the person that I am now.
What about racism?
Oh wow, that was a constant. You know, a lot of people.
Isn't it different though?
In Newark versus here?
Yeah, like, because this is the birthplace of America. We got, you know, founding fathers here that was built on slavery and stuff. I don't think New Jersey actually had nooses.
I don't know necessarily that they did or they didn't, but we did have the riots where we practically burned the city down to the ground, and only are just now starting to see in the last decade recovery from that. And it all stemmed from an unfortunate police incident involving, you know, racist behavior by the police department. And so we've seen our share. But it's the good thing about the city of Newark now is, and I haven't been there and I didn't serve under the existing mayor, but he's always been a very community oriented individual. So he's doing something that I like to see here. And that's he's engaging the community to assist the police department. And it's always been my opinion that the police can't be successful without the support of the community.
Absolutely.
So, and it was very interesting because during the George Floyd riots throughout not only the country, but throughout the world, there were incidents in the city of Newark, and I got to see something on Facebook posted by an individual who I was very familiar with, a woman by the name of Donna Jackson. Shout out to Donna. She actually, because she was so involved with the police and so involved with the community, she was able to see when outsiders came in from that area that were trying to antagonize the police, trying to attack the police and create havoc. And she and her group of people of the community put a stop to that and didn't allow that to happen because she recognized that that's just not the way to handle it.
Nice.
So that's what we need.
Yes, indeed. And just so you know, too, we have a partnership with Charlottesville Tomorrow and Vinegar Hill Magazine. Charlottesville Tomorrow is a legacy news organization. Vinegar Hill is the long-standing Black, started off as a newsletter for Black community, and now it's all throughout digital media. So like sort of 2017 spearheaded a collaboration, a partnership that we have with them between the radio station and those entities. So it definitely was definitely a turning point, for everyone. So we are joined by Inez Gonzalez of the newly elected executive director for Police Civilian Oversight Board. So you definitely have a strong background, like you said, whether it's been like through the internal investigations that you were part of in Jersey or whatnot. Probably the realest question that I have for you is, how transparent can you be about when folks talk about the badge, right? Or like the blue, you know what I mean? Like the network, the locker room, so to speak, of police officers. Because particularly in the Black community, that seems to be, like an issue, right? Of well, you can't set apart, quote unquote, bad cops from the good cops, because then you're going to be an outcast in your, office, like within your department.
And that's
like,
a very
you seem to hit that head on. Like, so, so I'm curious how you feel about that, just atmosphere of taking on that, and like how honest and transparent, like, do you really feel like that a group like this could be in the city, knowing that you kind of got to call out other people within your organization, your department? I mean, like, that has to be tough. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on it.
That has a lot to do with who's in charge of the police department, whether it's a chief, superintendent, director. Their leadership strategies are going to have to be a huge part of that. But you're starting to see now, and I hate to keep bringing up the George Floyd incident, but the George Floyd incident actually created a lot of police reform that didn't exist before, that was badly needed. And one of the things that you saw in the Floyd incident was leadership within that police department, as well as other officers from that agency, talk about all the things that he did wrong, things that were not part of the training that he received. They were completely opposite, and they actually started speaking out. And so I think the other important factor is you're also seeing, as a result of that case, police officers that were standing by that took no action while the officer that was doing wrong were also being equally held accountable. So they suffered the same penalties as the officer that actually did the wrong. Their failure to act is something that's criminal. And then you're starting to see more and more agencies now hold officers like that accountable.
I got a tough question for you. Where does the community go wrong when they bring forth allegations against a cop? Like, I've learned from all the times that I went to court that instead of making statements, you had to learn to ask questions, right? And when you ask questions, it forces the other person to answer from where they were in that situation. Let's say I got pulled over. I felt like I was unjustly done, and I'm hooping and hollering, and I'm saying, and I'm right, but I'm delivering it wrong. Where do you find that we can make our most adjustments when, like, we feel something needs to be looked upon? We don't want to just say it and you just sweep it under the rug, but we don't want to get belligerent to the point where it starts being looked upon the way I'm acting and not the subject that I'm talking about.
Right. And it's funny because I don't know if they have the same terminology here in Charlottesville, but where I come from in New Jersey, there's something called contempt of cop, which is not a real thing legally. But what it is that when a police officer takes an action based on the fact of how that interaction went with the citizens that they were dealing with, right? So if you're challenging him, if you're cursing him or her out or whatever have you, they then now find a reason to do something, issue you summons where they may not have, or arrest you, even though that wasn't the original intent. I think a lot of that has to do with, and it's easier said than done, right? Because if we know we didn't do, let's say, go through a light, right, hypothetically, and we get pulled over by the police, that's annoying in and of itself. It's also a very highly stressful situation. My I guess stress levels go up if and when I get pulled over. It doesn't happen frequently, but it happens. So we all become nervous under those situations. And so do I think that individuals need to tone it down, ask questions like you said, try to be, again, like I said, don't curse at the police officers, don't be belligerent, like you said, and ask questions, but at the same token, take notes, right? So, like, I've had situations now, and I hate to discuss things that I'm dealing with now, but I have some issues, I should say it this way, with motor vehicle stops involving police. And there are certain recommendations I'm going to be making to try to address some of those things because, for example, and so it goes back to something you were saying, police officers don't like to be challenged, right? They don't like their integrity to be questioned. And so they want for, let's say when you go into a courtroom, for the judge or whoever else to take their word for it. And what happens is if you pull someone over and that initial alleged infraction is not captured on video, it's your word against the officer, right? And the officer isn't always right.
Yeah.
And so what evidence does the individual have? And it always winds up being in a court of law, the officer's word against the civilian.
So why do we fight for constitutional rights when they really, from what you just now said, my constitutional rights aren't in the forefront when dealing with certain individuals?
But they should be. And I think, again, like I said, that still speaks to us having a lot more accountability measures for however much the police don't agree maybe with the statement that I'm making. We can't, as a blanket statement, say that police officers can be trusted to hold themselves accountable at all times. We have proven, we have seen from all the high profile incidents throughout the country that in the aggregate, right? Not speaking about individual police officers, because you have some really, really good cops out there. And unfortunately, the bad cops make it bad for everybody else. All right, but in the aggregate, we've proven already that we cannot police ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with politics. So I came from an agency, for example, that in the mid-90s had a police director that came in who was the right guy at the time. Now, he was a vicious taskmaster and he would hold us accountable sometimes to the extreme, but it's what we needed. But he didn't hold everybody accountable, meaning that if you were part of his inner circle, right, then you didn't get punished if you did something wrong. And so that erodes trust from within the agency itself. And that becomes problematic in and of itself because officers are like, well, wait a minute, not everybody gets held accountable.
We find that in task force around this part of Virginia. Like the task force seem to have a little more leeway when it comes to maybe their aggression than other officers.
Which is the other issue, right? Because there's no nationwide standards for police officers. So let's say in the city of Charlottesville, the chief that you have now could implement a whole bunch of accountability mechanisms and put them in place. But then what about when you deal with the other law enforcement agencies that also operate within the city itself, right? Because I said, my understanding, you have a city sheriff, a county sheriff. And so how do you control that?
Police.
Yeah, correct.
They want to run them off the scanner. Yeah, we got all that here in Virginia.
So there's no national standard, right? So you can have a police department, your local agency could be doing everything right, and you may still have an encounter, a very unfortunate encounter with other law enforcement agencies operating within the city, to include task forces made up of a little bit of everybody.
Got you.
So it's going to have to be something that, at least in my opinion, that should come down from the federal level or individual states where that accountability mechanism is put in place. But it's also my understanding the state of Virginia, they're looking to abolish oversight. It all depends on
What exactly does that mean? Go ahead and break that down.
What, oversight?
Yeah, no, abolish oversight.
Well, meaning that depending upon who's in political power in the, I guess, the Virginia houses, right, the state houses on that level, that you may actually have politicians in place that can vote out oversight, which would mean that all the oversight agencies that were created, such as the PCOP, would be eliminated.
It's like that's infrastructure. There's infrastructure that's put in place based on what she's saying, whoever your elected officials are, but it's the accountability too, right? It's because we're living in a time to where, the system is changing, the face of the system is changing. And so, my opinion, you got a lot of folks who are trying to prevent that. Like the way that the structure was put in place needs to stay, like for the sanctity of the powers that be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it would make sight that you wouldn't want any oversight to allow you to continue corrupt systems. Right? That's why you need oversight to prevent, to try to weed out the corrupt systems.
And that's why politics, though, I hate it. It becomes important for us to always stress to the people in our communities to always go out there and vote and make sure that we have the right people in positions of power so that we don't lose that level of accountability, because it's only going to revert back to where it was before.
So what's more important, in voting in the people that are going to be fair, or going after these laws and that kind of are shaded one way or left?
But you can't go after the laws unless you have the right people, that are in favor of, like, for example, police reform. You have to be in favor of police reform. Now, that doesn't mean extreme, like a perfect example of what I considered initially to be an extreme form of police reform. And that was abolishing the police department when they were talking about defunding the police. Right. And so defunding the police takes on different definitions depending upon who you're talking about. Right. But in the very beginning, it was like, we don't need the police. And I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, I've been said that.
Right.
You don't want that.
And defunding the police, for those of us old enough, for example, myself, who saw that in, I want to say, sort of like the mid 90s towards the latter part of the 90s, where we were getting a lot of money from on the federal level, and we were able to hire more police officers. And then it went to actually the early 2000s where we started losing money, and a lot of programs, a lot of training was eliminated, and that was a mistake. That was problematic because a lot of things that would have made policing better were taken away in favor of, I guess, putting the money elsewhere. I'm not really
Building
sure.
prisons.
Yeah.
Which, again, building more prisons, I think the goal is to try to prevent that from happening in the first place.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it is. And the compartmentalization of it.
Wait a minute, y'all. Wait a minute.
It's just so important.
Y'all, wait a minute. We can't go. We can't go past. We're not really past that because aren't they trying to put more money in the Albemarle County Jail?
Well, yeah, and that's my whole point. Is like she said, there's definitions of even defund, and like one good side of it, but of course I don't think it was communicated very well, is the fact that sometimes police officers get asked to do things that they shouldn't get asked to do. Right now, I feel like that you gotta pay properly, like in order like to get the best. A lot of times, you know, somebody's passion for any craft or any work is only going to take them but so far. Like they got to be properly compensated. So in that regards, I think defunding is a bad idea. We talk about like we need to like cut their pay and cut resources, but it is a good idea when it comes to what we need to find money and put money into certain programs, community programs and stuff, like to be able to aid, you know, what's going
Absolutely.
on. You know?
I agree.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
And the issue there is, again, as far as the defunding, what I was trying to say is that we need to have better training. I think police officers need to be trained a lot longer than they are. I came from an environment where I think the academy class was, 20 weeks of training, and you're expected to learn all of the case law in the state of New Jersey, for example, all of the motor vehicle traffic violations, and that's just not going to happen in that short period of time. The state police trains for about 6 months, but they also have a higher requirement. You have to have a 4-year degree. So there's a lot of things that, you know, that distinguish, for example, in my opinion, the level that the state police are in the state of New Jersey versus municipal police officers who get significantly less training and don't have that college requirement. So again, you almost sort of, I hate to say you get what you pay for, because that's a bad analogy when it comes to people, but you have to train them better. You have to set the bar higher. And it seems like we're making it easier for just about anybody to get on the job. And that's the kind of quality police officer you're going to get. So if you're going to set the bar lower, then you're going to have to create a lot more training. You're going to have to give them better training.
I don't think we should let anybody be a police officer that hasn't been in at least 4 fist fights in their life. Because, you know, when you see certain videos and they pulling the gun, it's almost like the Barney Fife syndrome, and their nervousness, like you said, goes up and they get tunnel vision and they fear for their safety. And they're like, you know, like, I mean, if grabbing your gun is your first means of,
that's a problem.
You know, right.
That's a problem.
Like, you're not looking at taking down the person. You're not looking at tasing. You're not looking at, you know, the confrontation about it. Like, you don't want them to touch you. You don't want, like, I think, honestly, if you ain't been in 4 fist fights through high school or elementary school, you shouldn't be a police officer.
Well, every situation is different. You're right. And there are going to be certain situations where a police officer has no other choice but to draw their weapon immediately, right? Life and death, right? That's what it is. But you are right. And it's really funny because I've had this conversation with officers my age, people that have since retired, and we talk about the same thing. And I hate to say that it's true, is that we were in a lot more fights when we were coming up. Again, in my entire career, by the good grace of God, I've never had to shoot and kill anyone. But I've been in plenty of fights. I've gotten knocked on my behind, a couple of times.
You look like you got a right hook.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, you got to know how to fight. And that was just par for the course. It wasn't like, again, I think it's generational also. I'm not really sure what that's about, but you're right. The first instinct shouldn't be. And there's other things that we need to look at, like part of police reform could be looking at less than lethal means. Like, for example, you've got agencies in the country that are looking at, they've got the shotguns, but they're rubber. Right. Those are the rubber pellets as opposed to actual bullets. So
kinetics or something like that.
Right. So there's different things that we need to look at. But again, accountability is a big thing. And again, I'm in favor of the body-worn cameras. I was trying to get body-worn cameras long before they were actually a thing nationwide, because I thought, in my opinion, that you could do a lot of good in terms of internal affairs by getting police officers off the hook that didn't do anything wrong simply because they had the camera to show, the footage of whatever it is that transpired. But at the same token, if you had a bad cop, there would be no way for them to be able to get out of that. That's of course if, again, they activated the camera, because that's a big thing. I mean, we saw something a couple of years back where you had a police officer respond to an assignment, a burglary call at an individual's home, and actually turned off the camera right before he shot the homeowner.
Wow.
So why do we have the ability to, like, it should be when they're in their car, as soon as they get out their car, it activates and they have no ability to turn it off. Like, we can get to the moon, so to speak, but we can't make it so that you can't turn off your camera. And that makes no sense to me.
Well, and that's funny because that was actually a recent a discussion that I had. I had the same discussion. I don't see any reason. One of the, I guess, arguments against what I was suggesting of having the cameras rolling at all times was that from a storage perspective, it may be something that storage issue, or maybe cost prohibitive to have that amount of storage. I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I have not yet had that conversation with the new city manager, but it will be a conversation that we will.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about loss of life here.
Absolutely.
Like, it shouldn't even be a question as to storage, and they spend money what they want to spend money on.
And until we get to a point where we've gotten the community's trust back, we're going to have these accountability measures in place, because it can't be any more about the officer's word against the citizens. There's got to be a little bit more than that if we're going to try to rebuild the trust that through, I guess, the fault of law enforcement throughout the decades is a fault of our own.
Yeah. Blows my mind is that, like, you still see some of them acting a fool, and I'd be like, don't they know cameras on?
Yeah. Cell phones and everything, you know what I'm saying?
Was it the Memphis incident?
Yeah, the Memphis incident.
And you had to ask yourself, you have body worn cameras. Why would you do something like that?
Yeah. So, but I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but that's the depth of, of this oversight, is that changing culture is hard. Like, we're here in Charlottesville, University of Virginia. People are constantly trying to change the culture that's been so deeply rooted, because of the history, of this area. And same with the police. It's like, without us even going into the history of why police forces were started and all that kind of stuff, we know that we know that there is, like, deep corruption in a lot of police departments, right? So to change that is a very heavy task. I mean, like, some would say it may even be impossible, but the least we could do is to have this oversight. But I'm curious about, like, the mental well-being, the mental health, because when I think about folks who are part of departments who do get taught, like, to shoot to kill, or they may even be in departments where they have a history of discriminating against certain communities and neighborhoods, racial profiling and stuff like that. Like, I got to imagine that there, and you may tell me that there is, I don't know, but is there some sort of, like, mental health sort of check-ins or well-being? Because to have that mind state, like, is an issue.
I think the mental health issue in this country in general is clearly an issue. And in the last few years, you started to see an uptick in organizations like the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, start addressing mental health when it comes to police officers, because people forget. Police officers are part of the community as well. They're human beings with the same types of issues that everybody else has. They have domestic violence issues. They have financial issues. They have issues with, children that are sick, spouses that are sick. So everything that you and I would experience, a police officer would experience as well. Right. And that, unfortunately, sometimes they take it to work. They shouldn't, but it's very difficult to be able to say that you can separate yourself from that. Some of us can do it. Others can't. And so, addressing the mental health in terms of police officers is a really big thing, but it varies from agency to agency. Again, there's no nationwide standard that says this is the type of service that you have to provide. I came from an organization that we didn't have anywhere to go to if we had issues and we wanted to sit down and talk to somebody. We had to call like an 800 number and something called cop to cop, and you can speak to someone. But again, those are not mental health professionals. Those are police officers or retired police officers that receive like a little bit of training to talk to you on the phone and try to talk you down.
I think that y'all go through way more. Like, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second. There are certain times when there's a necessary evil. Like, you have to have a certain level to combat certain things. I do believe in that, But also, when Charles said, there's organizations that train to shoot to kill and things of that nature, that's done long before they get to the police academy through these video games, Call of Duty and all these other things. Like, you got a child that's been playing it from 13 to 21 every day, hours on end. He's become desensitized. And some of these kids know exactly where, when you look at these shootings and stuff, they shot him in the ankle. They shot him in the, these are well-placed shots that people are putting. So you have to look. I would say when it comes to the police academy, give them a video game system. If they score too high, don't
I
hire.
love racist ideas.
They score too high. I mean,
So,
for real.
But wait a minute, for clarification purposes, because again, back in I want to say probably the late 80s, early 90s, we had an incident where it was a police involved shooting, and one of the city councilmen at the time asked us, why couldn't we have just winged them, right? We don't do that. So police officers are only trained to pull their weapons in a life and death situation when they feel, like you said, imminent danger to yourself or to someone else. But when we do actually pull our weapon and intend to fire, it is to shoot to kill. That's what we are trained.
What's wrong with your taser?
Well, it depends. Like I said, each situation varies, from situation. Not every situation is going to require you pulling your weapon. And I think what it is, again, I don't know if it's a generational thing or, again, a lack of training, or I really don't know. Again, our first instinct, we didn't have those toys when I first came on.
Yeah.
We had a PR-24 when I came on, which was a step up from a nightstick. And
Is that a billy club?
Well, yeah, but the billy club.
Yeah,
Well, they eliminated the billy club.
I know exactly what a billy club is.
Well, the billy club was a bad thing because they used it kind of like a bat, and headshots, right? So we were trying to eliminate headshots, so we wound up getting a PR-24. So that was more for like body shots and that kind of thing. But yeah, again, we didn't have a lot of the toys that you have now. So we had to either fight. That was the first course of action. You had to get physical. And if not, if you needed the PR-24, we also had, submission holds that we were trained to utilize. But so, yeah, back in the day, it was a lot more fighting. They have a lot more toys now. But it all depends. Every situation varies. And I have to tell you, I have seen recent videos, and I won't get into specifics. Obviously, I don't want the chief to have a heart attack about things that I'm talking about. But it's certain videos that were shared with me that I've seen where police officers showed an incredible amount of restraint here in Charlottesville, where they actually were, one guy got punched in the face, one officer got punched in the face, and his instinct wasn't automatically to, punch the guy back or fight him or any of that. He took his taser out, and he must have said like 20 times that, listen, comply or I'm gonna tase you, and never used the taser. He actually waited for the officers, backup officers to come by, and they subdued him that way. So I thought that took a considerable amount of restraint on the officer's part. I don't know if a lot of that has to do with who he was as an individual, if that's part of the training here or a combination of all those things. I know if that you had hit me in the face back in the day, I was gonna hit you back for sure. So
I'm gonna hit you now. You gotta come do your job.
But I give him a lot of credit. So in that sense, some of these guys show an incredible amount of restraint. And unfortunately others don't. But I have, like I said, right now, knock wood, Charlottesville has been subdued in comparison to what I would be accustomed to dealing with by now. By now, 3 months on the job in IA, I would have had about 100 investigations come in, excessive use of force, police involved shootings.
Now, what if we're scared at that time? Let's go from the point of the person dealing with the police officer, right? Let's say, for instance, I feel that I'm dealing with an officer who could potentially hurt me. What do I do in that sense? Again,
I would always suggest that whenever you have an encounter with a police officer is that you attempt very hard not to antagonize the officer, to be professional, be compliant. If you notice, a lot of our issues in the Black and Brown community is that we encounter police officers, and because we believe ourselves to be in the right, and a lot of times we are, we feel like we don't have to be compliant. And I think it's better for us to be compliant, right, and professional and courteous, and just take mental notes, ask the appropriate questions, because we can always challenge it down the line. You don't want to antagonize the officer right then and there. Right. Have your day in court, file a complaint with the police department, come to us and make your complaint with us, or ask us to oversee the complaint that you've already made with the professional standards in Charlottesville. So there's different ways to do it, but I always believe that be compliant up front. Don't antagonize the officer. And like you said, wait until afterwards so you can have your day.
Why does compliant feel like it's a word set for Black and Brown people? Because when we asked people to wear masks, it was a problem.
Correct. You're right. And I don't disagree with you. I do believe that there's a distinct difference sometimes. And for anybody that doesn't believe that, it's because maybe their lived experience is different than our own. But you're right. Again, if you have, let's just say hypothetically, a white motorist that's not compliant, would the outcome be the same as it would with a non-compliant Black or Brown person?
Yeah, they can talk crazy to the police. Get out the car, move all around.
Firsthand.
Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. I haven't had any experience with the Charlottesville Police Department yet, so I don't know what's going on here yet. I got to give those guys the benefit of the doubt. But I have seen it both ways. You're absolutely right. I have seen individuals and a lot of the sovereign state people that actually don't believe that they have to drive around with driver's licenses and things like that. And they will challenge the officer at every step of the way, and they get a whole lot of courtesy. Whereas
Yeah,
most of us would have been pulled out of the window by that point.
Yeah.
So, but again, it varies from situation to situation. That isn't the case for everyone. Unfortunately, the media has a really good way of only showing us the bad things, and you never see some of the good things that police officers do. I've known officers that go into their own pockets for children, for the homeless, for things
shout
like
out
that.
to the officers that
absolutely.
that were shooting balls like last week too with the kids in the community. That was
playing putt. They got something over here. Like, I mean, we even had an event several years ago, IMHO with Charles and Max, where we had something out at Sam's Club, and the officers out there doing cornhole with the kids and taking pictures, and like those are things that I'd like to see us get back to as a community.
It's important,
but it only takes one episode to ruin all that.
It does. And that's the unfortunate thing. Like I said, you have more good cops out there than you have bad ones, but it will only take the one incident with one bad cop, and it just ruins it for everyone. And that's unfortunate because, again, it erodes trust. So right now, like I said, the climate seems to be good. People seem to be getting along. We're achieving a lot more things together right now in Charlottesville. But again, it only takes, God forbid, another situation similar to that of George Floyd for it to all, just go right back down the tubes again.
And you have a new means to try to educate and communicate as well, because unfortunately I'm talking to like too many young people who see compliance on video. The world sees it and they still get killed, still get beat. So unfortunately we're in a time where now our education about how to deal with run-ins with law officers, like now we got to convince people that like that complying makes a difference.
You're right. And again, it's a very difficult argument to make when you're right, when you do have a compliant individual and somehow or another still get shot.
Yeah.
So how does that happen? And again, that's just a police officer that should never have been allowed to be one. But it's been my experience that when you look at a lot of these incidents, with a lot of these bad police shootings, high profile incidents, if you look at the officer's history, you would have seen that there was plenty of red flags long before that. Yeah. And that also has to do with the leadership and accountability as well. Because again, if you're monitoring your police officers, if you're identifying them through like performance measures, right? So for example, where I came from, if you got 3 complaints within a 3-month period of time, you were going to flag in our system. And we were then going to send something to your commander saying, hey, listen, this guy's got 3 complaints. You need to have a conversation with him. You have to look at it, or we're going to have to turn it into a formal investigation, right? Because where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and some complaints come standard. I mean, again, and this is why, I came from a data-driven agency. And so a lot of what you do in the police department from a leadership perspective should be based on metrics that you're capturing, right? So we found out, for example, that all of the officers that were assigned to traffic duties that were giving a lot of motor vehicle summonses were to get an increased amount of complaints against them for demeanor. Nobody likes getting a ticket. And a lot of times they felt like, well, if I make an IA complaint against the officer, then I'll drop it against you, you drop it against me.
Okay.
You see, so you saw things like that. We saw police officers with the greatest amount of sick time, for example, were also bad in terms of productivity. They didn't make the least amount of arrests. They had the least amount of summonses that were issued. They were just unproductive police officers. So metrics play a really big part on how it is things should run, but that also applies to discipline. So if you see that a police officer has X number of complaints or behaves in a certain way, you have to pay attention to that and you have to correct it. And if you don't, unfortunately, you're going to get these high profile incidents because that officer will inevitably get involved in something that's going to cause a problem for the agency.
I know we probably didn't have a lot of complaints when I was coming up as a kid because we used to run. One officer couldn't pull over 3 of us. You know what I'm saying? We used to not telling kids to do it, but I laugh about that and make the point of officers are in much better shape nowadays. Officers come from like sports backgrounds, military, things of that nature. And I also, and this is me playing devil's advocate again, you take a person who's played football his life, been through the military, they're wired a certain way. So now when it's go time, something switches inside them. And the second that officer subdues somebody that was going to hurt other people, we're congratulating. The second that officer makes an error in judgment against a regular citizen, then we look at them like they're the worst. So I'm not trying to make, I'm not trying to make an excuse or a scapegoat for anybody. I just understand that when I've been doing this my whole life and then I transfer over to something else, y'all can actually police officers can look and say, okay, he's a good candidate because he MMA fights. He, he served a couple of tours. He defended the country. Like he checks good boxes. But then you put him in a situation where a threat is a threat. And a lot of times people don't look at the puppy threat versus the big growling dog threat. It's a threat, and that's how I'm gonna deal with it. So how can we ever, like Charles said, how can we ever get to a point where we can kind of coexist and be happy with the outcome when it takes a certain level of something to, I don't want Barney Fife showing up to help me. You know what I'm saying? I want RoboCop if I need him, right?
Right.
But like we said earlier, though.
But you don't want RoboCop pulling.
I don't want RoboCop
Yeah.
pulling me over.
Right.
So
But
how do we ever get
like
to
you
a
said
point?
earlier, though, like some things come with the territory. Chris Rock said
True.
the best. Some jobs you can't be bad at. Like it or not, there's some jobs you can't be a bad pilot,
Yeah.
and you shouldn't be a bad police
You're
officer.
right.
Don't get me wrong, a police officer shouldn't be judged by their worst day or by their by a bad day. But unfortunately, if that worst day happens to be for example, a police involved shooting or in custody death that was unjustified,
Mhm.
it just is what it is. And like you said, there's certain jobs you just can't be bad at, and it's unfortunate that
But we're
that's
asking
true.
them to be perfect.
Well, and right, and we're never going to get perfection. But I've always looked at it from this perspective. If we strive for perfection and fall just shy of that,
Right.
Yeah.
then the product that we're producing is acceptable.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
That time went fast.
That was a great, rich conversation.
Absolutely.
I definitely appreciate you being here. But any final words for the community as far as how they can be more supportive? Because I'm definitely curious on like your outreach mechanisms. Like thankfully I saw you at the Chiamba African American Cultural Arts Festival.
I've been making my rounds. I've been
Yeah.
trying to get involved in all the community events with our swag that I've been purchasing that has all of our information, whether it's the website, the telephone number to contact us. I've been meeting with organizations, for example, like the People's Coalition. They've been very helpful and supportive. So basically, I just need the community to get involved. The PCOB meets in city space under normal circumstances, the second Thursday of every month.
Okay.
So I just want people to get more involved in the programs that the police department has and the PCOB as well. And the police department, it's my understanding, is going to be coming up with a Citizens Academy soon. So if they have any questions on that, they can feel free to reach out to, for example, Sergeant Thomas outside of the CPD. He's involved. I think he's in charge of the Community Affairs Division, and ask about something. But I need the community to stay involved, to stay on their toes, and to keep the police officers on point.
I also want to say this. We need you to stay involved too. So after you made your connections, we still need you to make your round.
Oh no, that's a given. That's again where I came from. Community involvement was key, and I know that better than anybody. You can't be successful without the assistance of the community.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you once again, and feel free to tag us and and share any communications that we can help get to the public.
I surely will.
So we have been joined by Inez Gonzalez, Executive Director for the Police Civilian Oversight Board, and IMHO family. As we said, we're going to keep connecting you, doing what we do.
Absolutely.
Sir Charles Razor